Welcome to the Dork Forest. Jackie and her pals will never bore us. Shameless confessions
about our obsessions
will make us laugh and smile. So let's explore the Dork Forest and dork out for a while.
Hi, Jackie Kashian here. You're listening to The Dork Forest. You know the websites, dorkforest.com, thedorkforest.com if you like a determiner. JackieKashian.com has everything. Both of my podcasts, all of the stand-up stuff, the new album, links to YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, all the things. But so, I think, does dorkforest.com, where you can look at old videos of different shows. Anyway, if you want to support the show, tell people about the show, review it on iTunes, thumbs it up on Pandora or Spotify, wherever you listen to podcasts. I appreciate that. You can donate. You can donate monthly. PayPal lets you do that. You can also do my Venmo if you like. It's at Jackie Kashian, absolutely everywhere. And my email address is jackie@jackiekashian.com, and that's what the PayPal is. The PayPal link is on jackiekashian.com and dorkforest.com. And go to any of them. Thanks for listening. There's merch, there's stand-up, there's tour guide. You know, you can find out where I'm touring. This is getting long, so let's get into the show. Jackie Kashian here, sleepy, but ready to dork out with a stand-up comic, a podcast engineer for the Jackie and Laurie Show, a man who has his own podcast that is suspiciously similar to the Dork Forest called This Is Rad, and he has two albums that are both on iTunes and Amazon. Look up Kyle Clark, you guys, KYLECLARK, and I believe it's Kyle Clark is Rad on Twitter. Is that what it is,
It is
Kyle?
Indeed.
On the Instagram? Okay, welcome back to the show.
Hey, good to be here. It's good to be on the show I stole from so liberally all those years ago. And you know what? People are always like, two products can't exist. Sure can.
Sure can. And Joseph Scrimshaw has Obsessed, another show that I genuinely love. It's just a celebration of what people like. That's
you know what's great? Liking
right?
stuff. Like, yeah, it's we started it when the grand era of podcasting was podcasts where you just dunk on everything alive.
Yeah.
And I like things, and so I was like, I'm gonna talk about things I like and do that.
Instead.
And then was like, oh wait, I can combine my random the Twitter handle idea and Jackie Kashian show, and 7 years later I make some money off of it.
Isn't that the way of it? That's the way of podcasting, ladies and gentlemen. You too could 7 years later make some money.
Some money.
Still meaning you would still have to have a job.
Yeah.
But some money, you guys. Look forward to it. Kyle Clark, I didn't even ask. I was like, you had to have a dorkdom. I knew that there would. I was thinking you would pick other books, but you picked other books than the books I thought you would pick.
I mean, I'm a book boy, so we know this. As from a book boy to a book lady, we understand that books are a way to live.
We got spooky reading happening all around us. So what is your current collection of books looking like these days?
So
what's your obsession?
When COVID kicked in, and I quickly was without a job or things to do, 90% of why I do comedy is to be not home and instead out places with people, because I love socializing and attention. And all of a sudden we are in a situation where neither of those are allowed.
Right.
So I needed to figure out something to do to not completely lose my mind and Shining style kill my family. Mm-hmm. And I was looking at like, what is a skill? What's something I can do? Like, it's a GD correspondence course.
Oh, right.
And I have always wanted to know how to draw. Like,
have you ever tried one of those matchbook ones?
Which one's that?
Inside of a matchbook? I might be from the 1930s. On the inside,
but I often reside there as well, so I'm trying to place it.
Inside matchbooks they were like, draw this, and then you might get a free month of drawing lessons.
Oh, one of those. Yeah, okay, Draw the Duck.
Draw the duck.
Yes.
Draw the man with a mustache.
Yes. Yeah. I've started going down, and it actually man, just to continue the ripping off Jackie Kashian career I've put together, this comes in tandem with the second thing that you ruined my life with via COVID, which was pretty early on in COVID. You were working on a comic book script, and in an episode, you had talked about how it was hard. And I was like, oh, that's right. I've been meaning to work on one of those. So then because you had been talking about it, I started to work on a script, or just work on the idea of a comic book script. Not even that I had something, and was really struggling with it. And I said on This Is Rad something about like, man, right? Like, you know, Jackie is right. Writing a comic book script when you don't have like an artist or something in your head feels near impossible. So cut to, I get a random DM in the middle of the night from a listener to my show who had heard me say that and was a little drunk and DM me that if I wrote something, they'd draw it. So what that fool did not understand is that I had COVID jury duty the next day, which means sitting quietly at a single table by myself for several hours. And what I did was not bring a book, not bring anything except for a notebook. Because I was like, I, writer boy, will get bored enough and tell myself a story of some sort, and I'll put together comic pages. And I wrote 4 pages worth of book and sent it to him, and he drew it. And now we have a comic called Tales from an Analog Future that's like kind of a funny sci-fi thing. They say it's like Parks and Recreation inside a Transmetropolitan.
Is it a webcomic, or are you guys
No,
gonna print it?
it's a hard paper copy. Here, hang on.
All right, and he's gone to get it. He's gone to get it. Here it is.
Zine copies, and this partially, so they're in booklet form.
Okay.
But part of why that is I'm not sure if you found this, but people not buying CDs the way they used to on the road. I love having people.
It's real hard. You have to explain what the machinery they're going to need for it.
My merch table consists of nice people walking up and telling me that their car no longer has a CD player.
One after another. Just one person after another. And I was like, they make good coasters. Anything?
Really do.
Okay.
And so I needed to figure out a new piece of merch. And I was like, well, you know what I should do is comics are incredibly hard to make. So I should for sure commit to doing that with someone.
Right, and books are heavy.
Yeah.
So definitely. So something that's labor intensive. And
it seems fine because it's not vinyl. And that was like the other direction to go. I'm like, well, that certainly sounds like a hellscape.
Yeah. Vinyl is very, very bad. Amy Miller told me that they wouldn't let her do carry-on of her albums. And so she had to check them, and they all melted.
Yes, there was that run there where it became a very hip, kind of sexy thing to do. But I think like you have to have such a lifestyle as a comedian to justify having that it's kind of like it is financially irresponsible to try to do it as not a famous comedian.
Well, it's really, I mean, or you just bring 5.
Yeah.
That can sort of fit in front of you, at least during takeoff.
Yeah.
And then you can take them out and gingerly leave them on your lap during the flight. And,
not a bad idea. They'll melt under my Switch, though.
Right. So that was the writing
all
thing.
Evolves into. So that's the writing thing. And then one of the things that I always try to find important is if I'm collaborating with somebody, I want to figure out what is the best language I can use to communicate what I'm looking for. I abhor.
That is incredibly thoughtful.
I always feel like it's what we should all be doing as a society.
Yeah,
but
sure.
like I
love community.
And some of it's me being like needy and having abandonment issues. So I'm just like, if I know all the things and can be super helpful, you won't leave me. And so I was like, well, I should learn some art stuff. And I've been messing with a program called Procreate on the iPad, and I got a stylus, and I would do stuff like that. And a lot of times I did a thing for a while where I was tracing pictures of comedians and then putting like words and imagery with it, like Raymond Pettibone used to do. Okay. And those were fun. And then I a couple weeks in, or I think, it was July 2020. I was sitting around, I had done a couple of these things. I was sort of in the mindset of like, oh, I'd like to maybe figure out some stuff so I can communicate to him. And also like, I wonder if you can, I come from a culture where like, I was under the impression that if you're not instantly good at something and gifted, you should not do it.
Why bother?
It was I think that's why I take on so much stuff as an adult, is because like I was not seen as bright or talented as a child, but now I've learned that if you read enough books, you can do things. Yeah,
it turns out that you might, if you try 30,000 things and find out what you're the savant about, it's going to be none of them.
It's wild stuff. Yeah, I was big as a kid, and so I think because I looked older, but I looked 8 when I was 5, so they're like, that's a dumb 8-year-old. Come on. But it was fine. It meant people left me alone to read and write and learn how to watch TV and be funny.
And you lived.
Yeah. And so now kind of coming back, there's, especially in the last maybe 5 or 6 years, as I'm kind of in my 30s, I'm trying to like get my life together a little bit more. I started eating better and living. And so it became this thing of like, what would I do? And so I'm looking on Amazon as I do, and just literally typed in how to draw. And of the things that came up, I had purchased one book a while back. And so those folks listening, I have the books I'm about to discuss with me. That I can visualize. So these do make it onto YouTube. Perfect.
Right.
Okay. So first thing I got here was a few years prior, I had bought Bert Dobson's Keys to Drawing. And this is a solid book. It's very old school. I believe it's published in the 70s. I also have learned that like the aesthetics I enjoy for different things, I find some books more alluring than others because I love weird professional artist style 70s drawing.
Okay.
But his is a very like sketchy style. You can see on the back. That's kind of the vibe of it. And it's very much like an art school instruction of like looking and learning how to like, basically it's about life drawing.
Okay.
And I found life drawing at that point to be a little too intimidating.
Oh, like an actual person?
Yeah, to like sit, or even to draw like a still life or something. I don't know enough to know when I finish it if it's good or not, or if I did it. Mm-hmm. Again, I'm very much I like to learn as much as I can before I do. Just because, again, I come from that culture. And this doesn't mean my parents. This is like the Simi Valley world I come from was the like, well, if I mess up once, I'm banned from doing it ever again. So I should try to learn as much as I can. Yeah. And so I'm looking through, and that book is cool, but it's not doing what I need it to do because I feel like I need a little bit more structure. And then I find this book. You can draw in 30 days. And I was like, sure, okay, book, I call your bluff. It is written by a man named Mark Kistler, who had a children's show called Imagination Station on PBS that is like an art show for children. So this guy, I have that book. All of the rest of his books are trash. Okay. But this book kind of got me through COVID. Because those first 30 days, I did one a day. I have been buying, I had bought at one point as a real lark, a 5.5 by 8.5 sketchbook. Okay. I've always liked the way they look, and so I bought one of those in this book. And we're like, all right, every day we're going to sit down and we're going to do the lesson and the extra credit lesson. And so like first day, draw a circle, and it's you do the circle and you shade it out, and now all of a sudden, oh shit, it looks like a sphere. Sphere. And then day 2, so first day was day 1 sphere, day 2 many spheres, and then it goes through different shapes, and it's teaching kind of how to like think in terms of shape on things. And then it's a book that's giving you all the skills to make things look like they are drawn in 3D. And it's not a kid book, but it's kind of an anybody kind of book. So and I will say the first 28 lessons of the book are still the basis with which everything I've since then grown and learned and studied, and as I've expanded and figured out what I needed to do, all of it comes from this. Like every other book I'll show. Lessons or whatever. Now lessons 29 and 30 are garbage. Because it's when he starts getting philosophical with you. So it like takes some real jumps, and he's just sort of trying to hype you up. And I was like, dude, I really could have used 2 more lessons here. Let's get back to drawing many spheres. And so, but it was, it taught me basic perspective, basic shapes, and things with the 2 of those, how to cut a hole into a shape, in 3D, and how to, make sense of stuff, like I can now like freehand draw like 1 and 2 point perspective, a thing that like at some point in my life was like, that's not possible. That's a thing you need a government license to do.
No, you could be taught, it turns out.
Yeah. And
so were you doing them every day, like 28 lessons, 1 a day?
Yeah, I was doing I was doing 1 a day, but I was also doing like then taking all the lessons I'd learned up to that point and sitting in the sketchbook and just like filling a page or 2 a day.
Okay, and using those tools. Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
And so about 6 or 7 lessons in, when I was all of a sudden really immediately starting to kind of see results, and it was the first kind of positive post-COVID thing that had occurred where I was like, oh, I feel. Yeah. And so I kind of,
What's the name of this book again? I'm so sorry.
This is called You Can Draw in 30 Days from Mark Kistler.
Thank you.
And so I went and bought a couple more, and this began, again, so the learning to draw on this has been an incredible journey, but the sub thing, and I part of me thinks I should do, just because I have so much of this at this point, that I should do some sort of project with it, is learning as somebody who's learning art from a correspondency kind of way or whatever, that there are a lot of how to learn to draw books out there, and they are not all created equal.
No. Some people are better teachers via the book than others.
And some of them are garbage that has the words draw manga on it and is barely a book.
Now, the book that I gave my nephew, and then I also gave Lori Kilmartin's, or I told her to, and she got it for her son, was How to Draw the Marvel Way.
which is a great one. I got that
one?
somewhere. That's a seminal one. That's
comics. Yeah.
I'm kicking off. So this is basic theory. So I've got that under my belt. So now what do I need to learn? Let me look around. So the first thing I think is like, okay, I need to learn about anatomy, because that's like the one thing, faces and bodies and things like that this thing didn't really cover. So after Mark Kistler, the next name that you're going to see a whole bunch in the art world is a guy named Chris Hart. And Chris Hart has a billion books. I have this one called Figure It Out. It might be his only worthwhile book to a certain extent, because he has a couple other ones that are good, but like mostly those ones are sort of just like, here's the steps to copy a thing. Like, I have his, because I, at this point, I'm starting to go like, well, what do I want to do with this? At that point, it's like, I'm working on the comic. I would like to just like, basically, it's all of a sudden, it's like, all right, in 2020, I'm going to learn to draw, and my focus is going to be, I am just going to take myself to faux college for comics and graphic novel work. Okay. And so read a bunch of stuff, really was reading a ton of things within comics, stuff like that, and going through art and stuff. But then, so I started working with Figured Out, which is not a terrible figure drawing book. And I find that like it was useful as a first step to kind of get a sense of like, building something from armatures, figuring out how to build a stick figure that has elbows and knees so you can figure out positioning and like what the ratios on the human body are. And so how like your rib cage and your head are ostensibly like the same size as an adult. That's which is something that like broke my brain. Is
I don't know why I knew that. There was a book that we had when I was a kid, was How to Draw People or something like that.
Yeah.
And what I never met, can you draw hands?
I'm working on it sometimes.
Hands and feet are kind of hard.
Feet are rough. Feet are the thing I struggle with the most. Hands is, I have to be thinking of, like, I can't draw hands doing nothing, but if hands are doing something, because they're so shaped and you know where the breaks are, I can do that. But just standing at the side, they look terrifying.
I cannot draw a hand that's attached.
Yeah. And so this thing gave me bodies, and it's also, this is kind of the best, like, kids version of it, because it's probably it's the most conservative in its figures that it gives. But it also definitely leans towards like a specific kind of cartoon style, which is all well and good, because for me at a certain point, it's like all looking at every style, like you're going to kind of develop your own over time anyways. So whatever you pull from different places.
If you can learn how to do it one way to begin with, that is good, because then you could build off of that.
Exactly.
But learn how to do it at all.
Totally. And these three then now set the thing of like, now I know like the structural basics that they have, like shading, perspective things. Now I understand like elements of the human body and how it looks and how it's shaped and all those things. I got a basic thing. So the next run I have for the while is just going hog wild with both of those, just doing, I've probably done the Kistler book, I'd probably have done it 2 or 3 times all the way through at different points. And like the figure book kind of copied every piece I had. I started buying, what's nice is like, I am, broke from, and didn't have a job and stuff like that. But art supplies and art books are very cheap, especially if you're utilizing eBay for art books. Like whatever's going for like $20 on Amazon, you can find for $3 on eBay with shipping.
There you go. Yeah.
And so that became a real fun game, was also chasing that stuff down. But at a certain point I was finding, okay, I can do figure stuff up to a point, but there's a point that this book can't get me past. But around this time, I also have started having a few friends who do art have like taken a vague interest in what I'm doing, because I seem to be pretty earnest about it.
Right.
And what's nice is I can start sending a couple of people stuff. So shout out to Jay Gonzo, the artist writer of La Manos Destinos, the amazing Mexican wrestling comic book that's out soon on Image Comics. A dear friend of mine, and really early on was a big pusher of like pushing me to kind of do more, try more, do things. And so I was like, okay, well, I guess I got to start digging for more stuff, because I've kind of hit. And faces were the things that I was having a ton of trouble with. But now starting to learn after these 2 books that so much of what this is, just like, I play music and I do sound and I do comedy, like there is quote unquote rules to this stuff. And while you have to practice it, if you're following those rules of thumb or pieces, you can start getting to where you need to go. You don't have to start from zero with nothing each time, which is literally how I thought art worked, is that you look at a blank thing and go, I have the vision and I shall do all the pieces perfectly. And it turns out, nuh-uh.
No, that's not. So, but how do you do faces though? Like, what did you learn? Yeah.
So this is the weirdest book in the entire run. This is Fun with a Pencil from Andrew Loomis, which is from 1912. 1920 or something like that. It is ancient. The art in it is truly horrifying at times, charming at times, wildly racist occasionally.
Oh, wow.
But
all right.
The Loomis method for facial drawing is, I've come now to find other art instruction things that are literally just built off of what he did and expand out. There's this company Proco who has a great YouTube channel that also uses all Loomis stuff. And it is a format. And it's, you do a circle, you cross the circle. Yep. The eyes are on the lines of that piece, and then you ratio down. And it's pretty standard for most things now, but this was the first thing I had that really spelled it out in a way that I needed. Okay. And I find that that text it's a big, ugly book with a bunch of weird bullshit in it, but like, my God, it is weird how much if you go through his little face thing there, like, you're good. Like, even like today when we were doing the pod, I drew 2 tiny faces using Loomis method while listening to you guys talk.
Yeah.
It's if people are ever wondering in the Jackie and Laura videos, I have to be doodling so that I will continue to listen to your voices, or I'll get distracted by crap on the computer.
Right. Then you'll just start multitasking.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, I'm going to send out a veils.
I learned that many years ago at jobs, is that must keep the hands moving, else they will get me in trouble.
Right.
So I'm kind of working through those, and that again was big, because now I can do people and they can be moving and stuff like that, and it's sort of working around. The next step is trying to was a lot of just so I have these 8.5 by 5.5 little notebooks, and it just became, for the last 2.5 years, I wake up in the morning, because my COVID rules were you're up early in the morning, you're showering, and you're being a person in people clothes.
Okay.
I fall to depression quickly, so I needed to keep myself responsible.
Yeah, you got to create some structure, even if there is none. Yeah.
Oh yeah, and so it became especially when there was the really nothing to do. I would get up, shower, do that stuff, and then sometimes I'd sit for 2, 3, 4 hours just drawing, just filling pages, doing armatures, doing stuff, and then started to hit the walls where something, either you're bored or it's not hitting or you're not having ideas. And I found that it was time I had to start refining things or adding things to it. One of the things I started to do was I'd love to color things. And
wait, so when you say refining, or are you going back with on previous pages and?
No, usually kind of moving forward, and just kind of new pages, but needing to. So it's I'm finding where the holes are in my skills.
Okay.
And so the things that I was really finding, perspective was still sort of touch and go. I sometimes had it, and man, perspective books are the hardest thing in the world, because there's fair amount. Some of them are great. Some of them are profoundly confusing. There's the standard one is Perspective Made Easy, which is again from 1931. Okay. It is technically effective. It is not a wildly engaging read. And so it's weird that sometimes you are reading a book of your own volition, full of information you want, and yet you are still sort of what's on TV in your mind a few words in.
I got to get out of this book.
And ultimately I found there's this guy who has a whole series of books. His name's Marcos Mateu Mestre. And he has, his first book was called Framed Ink, which I bought, which is on composition, which is still one of the things I'm working on years later is but he has this book called Frame Perspective. And this is the first volume of it. And I would just be if somebody's trying to learn perspective, this is just the book I'd hand them. I was look, there's other stuff and you could go, or you could just get this now, because it's funny. It's his art is amazing, and he's incredibly clear and specific. And then there's also just 1,000 examples of different ways to do it. Simple ones, very ambitious ones that help you sort of see the perspective through a piece of art. He has for single point perspective, which for those listening, perspective is where how you arrange something on a page to again create the idea of 3D by creating distance and size distortions and stuff. And he'll show a neighborhood street, and it's very detailed, and there's lots of houses, and there's all these things, and then you just here's the lines that are the same drawing, and it's just all the perspective lines, and you're just oh, duh, thank you. These 2 images are the most helpful thing I've had in a year and a half.
So it's line of sight, or is it?
Sorta. It's you find, for one point, you have a fixed point at the center of whatever you're looking at. And because you're looking at it, everything around you is going to look like it is moving out from that.
Okay.
So it's like when you look down a hallway and it looks like stuff's veering off in another direction.
Right. Sometimes horror movies will have that sort of forced perspective or whatever. Yeah.
And it's also fun because like the more I did this, the more I see all this stuff in the world. And especially after coming back out into the world when I just want to look at things. Now it's like, oh look, those are going that way, and this. And then he actually has a second volume that I have. This is the one that I'm doing a lot with now because of stuff. So shadowing is still something I kind of struggle with, and then also drawing people in perspective is a whole other kettle of fish that exists. So he actually has a second volume that's just shading and people in perspective.
Oh, okay.
That's also good. I those were a real find. Like that was like just kind of kept digging. And it's like, okay, his main book's this, but these other two are straight fire.
Are you getting suggestions of books off of YouTube videos, or are you getting them just by looking at books?
A mix of all. Some YouTube videos, a lot of like art blogs and like lists of like, here's some great books, and then I would cross-check them against Goodreads. That was sort of my like first line of defense. Often is.
Well, it's great because there's so many good reviews. And Amazon as well. You know,
and Amazon is good. Sometimes I won't trust the Amazon people, like because if you're on Goodreads, you're a dork.
Yes.
And I appreciate your candor as a dork because it means you thought about this.
Yes, and you're willing to do a good read, and you have to admit that you've read it.
I truly have a you must be at least this librarian for me to take you seriously. Too much academic background.
So, it sounds like there were books in the beginning that were more workbooks, but now they're just suggestions that you have to sort of pull the lessons out of. And you're like, I'm going to try to do that, but there's not a clear-cut lesson there.
And then from there, you then have the thing that's where I kind of had to step into. And again, I'm a person who's very easily intimidated. So, but at a certain point, I was like, okay, I get to expand this. So I ended up doing two different directions. One is I picked up painting. And I started with watercolor. And I used to think watercolor seemed lame because it's just people drawing flowers and birds.
Oh my
and it turns out you can do all sorts of weird crap with it.
Well, and it's also very hard to work with.
Yeah.
It's so wet.
And the game-changing thing I discovered is the water pen. And so there is this magical invention here. I'll pull it. So this is my travel art bag. This is my best friend. It has a blue cat on it. Yep. And I built a bag so that I could take this and my notebook anywhere I go. In 2020, my brother had some really bad dental stuff and needed to have dental surgery. And it took a couple of runs. And I was driving him to all of it. Well, I can't even sit in the room, so I just have to be outside. So I made this bag so that I would just sit for the couple hours while he's there. And I would just sit, try to find a shady spot and just do watercolor or whatever's in front of me until his bleeding mouth gets out of the dentist.
Ew. And
very ew.
So that's got painting. That's got paints
here,
in it.
let me show you this, because this is my favorite thing I've ever discovered. It's all tore up. There is a Japanese company that does different size travel boxes. And this one, it is 12 pallets. You open it up, and it's got mixing pieces. It's got the paint in there. And then do you see these little pens? These are the greatest thing in the world. Instead of a paintbrush, it's full of water. It's inside of it is water, and then you can it's like a paintbrush, but that you squeeze, and it gives you a little bit of water at a time, and then you can go in there, and then you have a little paper towel that you dry off, to get what you don't need and go through. And that totally changed how I look at it, because like the brush was so like, it's gonna spill everywhere, but this like making it a little bit cleaner and a little more manageable on where you're going changed everything.
Sort of like the fanciest. It's like it's like markers, but fancy. But
1000%.
Yeah. Okay.
And so I ended up. It was maybe one of the most nerve-wracking runs. Had to travel in 2020. I had an uncle who died on the East Coast, and we had to go back very suddenly for a funeral. And I brought that back, and that truly like no more beautiful thing to have in a time where you're trying to avoid people, but stuck in a lot of things that you can duck out into the basement of their Virginia home and just like draw a radiator and then watercolor. And they're like, where have you been? Just sitting quietly, not talking or being around.
Right.
And so that again became like a real run. And then last summer, I think it was last summer, I had been flirting with wanting to do acrylics for a while. And I had done a little reading on acrylics, but I also sort of had been doing this stuff enough that I was like, you know what? Maybe I just like go for it. But was still sort of like, I'm intimidated. So that's a line. And then what happened was, again, we had another family situation. And so I was back from another family situation. But this time, the moment we got home from this real long thing, My parents immediately left for a trip to Hawaii.
Okay.
And my brother and his girlfriend left for France for 6 weeks to go work on a farm. Wow. So it's just me and the dog hanging at the house.
Right.
And so I decided to take it upon myself to like, this is when we're going to go learn painting. And I am going to go full indulgent and just went full like full acrylic outside, but then also like just living it, just the music going outside, shirt off, painting things. And I'd been fascinated by like blacklight posters. So I did one acrylic piece that was a blacklight poster based on a digital thing I'd done. That's just, it's very immature. It is a happy face smoking a cigarette that says fuck, and I called it 2020.
Sure. Sure. You gotta vent somehow.
Yeah. Here, wait, I think I've got it here. It's, it was quite cathartic.
You got it. And he's pulling it down. Oh, there it is in acrylic. And
it glows in the dark. When you put it under a black light, the yellow and the orange both fully glow.
Oh, that's hilarious.
And then I started doing kind of more and more of those, and that became it. And that's even a different thing, because to me, it's now become the thing of like the drawing is just like, it's sort of like doing comedy almost, where like if I don't do a little of it a day, I feel a little off.
Okay.
And whereas like the acrylic more feels like we're kind of having a fun party, you know. It's just like,
because are you using all those skills? Are you using the perspective and the
somewhat
how to draw a person and how to draw
like the figure pieces? It's that was a real learning thing, because it was such it's such a different medium that even like drawing a person, so many different elements apply to it, and you kind of have to like that. I was not expecting for painting to be so much different from drafting and drawing with pencil and inks and stuff like that.
Right. The way the paint goes on the paper from watercolor to so were you painting with watercolor? Were you painting flowers and
no, although I did end up doing something like that, but I'm trying to think like I have the old watercolor book here. Hang on. I did.
Was it in a notebook?
It was. There was a watercolor notebooks. Like there's like mixed media ones. So like here's like I did a phone booth, but that was just a perspective exercise that I decided to then paint.
In watercolors though. That's kind of cool.
So I painted my pills I take in the morning. Like at one point I have a Mickey Mouse coaster that I put my brain medicine in. And so I drew that one day because that seemed like a fun thing to do. Yep. I did like my dog, you know, so that was starting to get into those kinds of things. Right. And I'm also doing all this in secret at this point because like I haven't really told people about it, and I'm not. That was before I kind of got back onto social media.
Right.
Because that's actually what got me.
Yeah.
And that's what got me back to social, was finally going like I should show this stuff to people instead of just burying it in a small hole in my room.
Right.
And so and then the other half of it became, all right, I'm making a comic with somebody where I'm just writing.
Yep.
I feel like, and I'd been watching one more shout out to a thing on YouTube. Shout out to Cartoonist Kayfabe, which is two comics artists who are doing the Lord's work and just breaking down comics from a technical design point of view every day.
How do you spell Kayfabe?
K-A-Y, I believe it's K-A-Y-E-F-A-B-E. No, K-A-Y-F-A-B-E. It's a wrestling term.
F-A-B-E. Okay.
And they do a lot of great stuff, and they kind of pushed me to kind of not just try writing but also try drawing, which I am up and down in, but it led me to probably the last of the books that I'll really like feel like I should throw a shout out to, and that is this one that I almost would recommend you might think is interesting as well, just because it really made me appreciate it, and that is Drawing with Words and Writing with Pictures. And this is by Jessica Abel and Matt Madden. And it is a 15-course program for making comics. It's one of two comics books. Ivan Burnetti's Comics, Art, and Philosophy is also good. I think this one's a little bit better structured and a little better in how it slowly presents. I think the Ivan Burnetti book's fun because it really makes you think about the concept of what like iconography and images are in graphic storytelling, which is a lot. Whereas this one's like, hey, this is penciling. This is what that means. And here's what a layout is. Right. And so I have been working my way through this. I'm not done with this one yet, because this one, like, this really feels like school, because now I'm taking everything I learned in the last year from those skills and having to apply them to then making many images that serve purposes. Okay. Which is, you know, different than me going like, I'm gonna draw my Bluetooth speaker today. And, you know, and so that, you know, has been a really wild thing. But I truly feel like between Cartoonist Kayfabe and this book, like, fully changed the way I look at comics in a way that makes me go from person who loves comics to person who effing adores comics, because they're so hard. And, despite things like, it's not a wildly rewarding career, to go into if you don't love this stuff.
Oh, it's much like podcasting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or stand-up, where it's you gotta love this thing or you're having a bad time.
Right. There's not, you don't do it for the money.
Yeah.
And but the weird thing is, so this book, the drawing with words, writing with pictures.
Yeah.
The idea is that you were telling this some sort of story, but you're telling it with the images.
Well, that's how they describe sequential art, is that you're drawing with words and writing with pictures, and that all of it is giving you the information as the whole that leads to it.
Oh, okay. So drawing with words is sort of, because the way the script for comic books works, you have to explain what the scene is. I remember the first draft I wrote of the one comic book I've written, and it was just an 8-pager in an anthology, but he didn't know what happened at night until like the second or third pass. He was like, wait, is this happening at night? I was like, yes. And so all the art had to change, and it hadn't yet gone to art, so that was the good news. But it would have.
Brian Michael Bendis has a great quote about writing a comic book script, that he's like, it's not a script, you're writing a letter to the artist.
Well, that's interesting.
That was my big thing with working with again, I should shout out Sean Otwell, the artist for Tales from an Analog Future with me. Like, that became the thing, is like, I am writing the story, but I am just describing the idea I have to the smart visualist who will make me look like not a fraud.
Right. Not a fraud.
But with the drawing with words, which is actually a book I learned existed in the Meltdown days. Like, I had wanted to buy it back in the Meltdown days, but was like, I'm no artist. I can't buy a book. They'll arrest me. I can't learn things. And so, but even that I'm still struggling with pieces of it. I find drawing on Bristol board to be very uncomfortable because it feels expensive.
What is that?
Bristol board is thick ply paper that you draw comic books on.
Okay.
It's a little more resilient. It takes black ink, ink well. Because that's learning to ink. Good Lord, that has been a thing. I've tried the Micron pens. I've tried brush pens. I bought a dip pen, which is what classically they use for comic book art, the calligraphy pens and stuff like that.
Right.
That led to a whole game of like, I now am in love with art supplies. I always thought they were cool, but again, didn't have the chance. So like, I did go a little buck wild at first, because again, when something is $3.
Because you were getting a lot of stuff off of eBay, you said.
Yeah.
And so it was a lot cheaper than going to Amazon buying these books new.
Yeah. And it was cheaper than sticking, like, playing a bunch of video games or doing other stuff. Like, it became this thing of like, oh, I have this cheap hobby that I can keep doing a skill on. And like, for my weird convulsive brain, like, that was the jam. It's like, oh, we hit all the needs. I can consume and learn. Now,
I don't know anything about the production of comic books, but I assumed, I think that they were doing them on those iPad-y kind of looking those.
Now, like the Cintiqs. Well, what's interesting is every artist works differently. There is no real standard method for how stuff goes. There is some.
It can be anything.
I
know that a lot of people do have that sort of tablet kind of situation.
And really, anybody with a recent iPad is an iPencil away from having a version of that.
Okay, because you can get that software.
Yeah, and there's different layers of it and different things, because this became the thing of like, I did so much analog that learning the digital, but with the comic book stuff, part of it, and what they kind of encourage you to do in general, but again, it's just traditionalists telling you to try a thing, is doing it all analog, because you sort of get a sense of the workflow in a way that does then transfer over to digital sort of the same.
Okay.
And I think it's worth doing. Everybody should do both at some point, because like, there are parts of doing all this that I love doing analog, but then other parts that I greatly enjoy, just doing, digitally.
Right, 'cause you said that you had Procreate.
Yeah.
And that's the software that you
and that's the kind of the most common drawing software they have for the iPad and tablet world of stuff, and it's pretty intuitive. I think I bought it because it seemed fun, and I was like, I got $5, let's do this.
Oh, really? It's that
I think
cheap?
it's $10.
Right.
But it's not prohibitively expensive. I think that's part of what makes it so great. The other one's like Manga Studio, that is now Clip Studio, is the other one that's very similar for people who do it on computer. Found out Dave Gibbons has been using Manga Studio for like almost his entire career since he's moved to digital.
Now, who's Dave Gibbons?
Dave Gibbons is the man who drew The Watchmen, and he also did Give Me Liberty, and he's worked on many other comic book pieces. But yeah, The Watchmen guy.
Okay. I've read The Watchmen. So it's so when you
copies are around.
Yes, it turns out. But if you end up, I mean, it's one of the cool things when you look at different comic books that is glaringly obvious that isn't as true as when you go to like when I go to an art museum. Oftentimes they will put the same kinds of art in an exhibit.
Yeah.
And so you will have to look at the difference between the artists within the same kind of genre or same kind of style. When you go to comic books, every comic book is drawn entirely uniquely. There is no standard.
Yeah.
It doesn't feel, I mean, some comic books are easier to read.
And there's house styles and stuff like that can take certain things. You know, I always think like that kind of everything sort of looks like George Perez at DZ in the 80s, unless it's a big stylist working in, and Michael Golden at Marvel for a lot of time.
And they're trying to sort of standardize, keep it sort of so that you're not freaked out when you see.
It's sort of why I fell off of a lot of modern books, is that the house style across both companies was just sort of not my jam. And so like, unless it was because I tend to like the real weird. I mean, my favorite person in all of comics is Charles Burns, who is a total fringy guy. But he did Black Hole, which is maybe like that, and Slaughterhouse-5, depending on my mood, or my favorite book of all time.
Oh wow! Okay,
and and it's one of those guys who's like really fun because I really appreciate him because he is weird and he makes really interesting stuff, but it's not willfully weird. It just feels like it's coming naturally out of a guy as the kind of story it is, but also like does a ton of corporate work, like worked with Altoids, like was one of the guys on OK Soda, if you remember that.
What? Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah, and so he's like in the same world as Klaus. He's a little weirder than Klaus, but I also think he's really kind of picking up as the world is getting wilder. I mean, Black Hole, one of the subplots is a guy who falls in love with a girl with a tail. And that was when I was like, is this my favorite book of all time?
Wow, okay. But when I, like some of the stuff, like I'll read, remember Bill Willingham?
Oh, yeah.
So
Fables.
Jack of Fables and Fables. And
loved Fables.
It had that newsprint kind of, it was printed on, all comics used to be printed on that newsprint. Yeah. And your hands would get gray and gross.
Even paper stocks from Kayfabe learning that like cartoonists have different opinions on how their stuff comes off in different paper stocks and methods, like, and how they'd have drawn it different if they knew it was going to this type of paper.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
that's
blew my
kind of
mind.
Fascinating. Yeah, that is super interesting. But then I remember, like with a lot of Sandman and Lucifer, they look like they were done in oils.
Yeah.
And some of them were. I guess some of the covers are often done.
Dave McKean's stuff was usually, I forget who did the covers for Fables, but it's a similar thing where they had like somebody with such a great defined style. I mean, I guess the same thing with like Glenn Fabry for Preacher.
I was trying to figure out, like, there is, and he was on the Dork Forest, and he's great. He's listening right now. He does the covers for, he did a lot of covers for Archie and Sabrina.
Oh, hell yeah. Those are amazing.
Yeah. And
glad you're listening. Great job. Big fan.
Right. So and his dorkdom was Doctor Who, and it was lovely.
Bless him.
And, God damn it. Where the hell? This looks like, because some of them were Robert Hack. That's his name.
Oh, there we go.
Robert Hack. And his Dork Forest is fascinating, too. I don't think I've done more than 1 or 2 episodes about Doctor Who. And his was the first one, I think. So it might have been 10 or 12 years ago. Robert, I think you're due. And, but he does a lot of covers. Yeah.
My current partner used to go to the Meltdown to see the vintage Doctor Who screenings. So it was weird that like many years ago, like we may have crossed paths when I was just like, we got to get these Doctor Who people out of here. The open mic's starting.
Doctor Who is unsettling for me.
It's scary, but that's kind of why I love it.
Yeah, it's incredibly well done with a very low budget for 20-odd years.
I love that old Who stuff. Up through, I mean, and the new stuff's also like a lot of fun. Like I've definitely fallen off, but like I love cheap stuff that's swinging out of its weight class. There's maybe nothing I respect more than something that is like outgunned, outfunded, and cannot possibly, and is still like, we're going to town. I'm just like, I will take my hat off to that every time. And that is so much of Doctor Who.
We have a 65-inch television, and so we're watching these TV shows, a lot of these BBC television shows, and it's too detailed. You're like,
yeah, that's an enemy to all of British television.
65. Nobody should have to be on this size television and see the props, and you can almost see the masking tape.
Oh, 100%.
So it's a bit of a trip. But it was interesting because there's comic books I want to write, and I did write just a premise, right? And it's but I like the idea that you can write anything, right? I mean, the one that you published yourself, Chris Mancini also has has one out.
I remember when he did that. That was really cool.
And it's ongoing. I think he's got another volume coming out.
I have right now, so with my book, it's 2 stories per issue, because I was like, well, it's already complicated. Let's also make it kind of like Love and Rockets. Okay. And so it's 2 12-page stories for a 24-page book. All stories are self-contained, but within the same universe and characters.
Okay.
And I wrote, it's going to in total be 4 issues. So it'll be 8 stories across these things. Basically, it's a group of characters who all like work together at like a Radio Shack, but we're in like an insane future. Because my thing was like, I always love take a really exciting world and let's focus on the most mundane part of it and never expand past that. So my thing was like, I love living in this future. None of these people are going to be heroes who save the galaxy. I want to know how their day was. And so
go ahead. Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, so like the 2 stories in the first issue, one is a guy who thinks maybe he made the wrong choices in life and ended up where he is because he could have been a nanofog rock star. Because I have a whole thing in this about how there's nanofog, or like tiny drones that can create light and shade. It's basically Mysterio from Spider-Man. Okay. But as a thing, that's like playing guitar, being a DJ in this world is like, you can be this and go to bars and do cool nano stuff. And that's a thing you can do. And so it's got all these sci-fi ideas, but all hung on the top of a guy who's having a midlife crisis. And the other one is about a girl who goes to community college. And I was just like, I want to see what future community college looks like.
There is a guy who I feel like he does his own, he draws and writes. And for many years he has a webcomic, and he has, he was doing paper comics, right? So, and his name is John Allison.
Oh, I know that name.
And his stuff is that slice of life. Yeah. Where you're like, what? And but he's been doing it for decades.
Adrian Tomine was one of my early favorite comic book people that I literally just stumbled upon. But he does Optic Nerve, and he does a lot of stuff for like the New Yorker for art and stuff like that. But he does these incredibly small moments as stories. And it broke my brain as a kid when I was reading it, like a sophomore in high school, where all I know is like Kevin Smith and Frank Miller and Alan Moore, and Neil Gaiman is like the most humanist of any of the writers that I'm dealing with. And then there's this guy who wrote about a guy who was just like a dick to someone at a temp job one summer. And it's like,
right.
I was just like, this can be a story. And that became, so much of the stuff, I mean, I've read every Chris Claremont issue of X-Men. Like I am on the table for many old classic things. I love old Teen Titans, but like I am massively influenced by like American independent indie comics, and really starting to find other countries' amazing comic work. And like, you really appreciate across the board with comics. Like Simon Hanselman's become a real favorite of mine as of late, who did Mega Hex and does Meg and Mob, which is one that's just fun because it's like, oh, these are insane characters, but like, and the drawing is not traditional what things look like, but like this is a perfect comic book world. Right.
Well, and the weird thing is that like, so I found this, which is his, it's this slice of life about these women who go, and he has an entire separate comic book about where one of these roommates in college grew up.
I love that. That's what makes all this stuff awesome.
Right. It really does, because it can be about anything, and he did it himself, and I think that it, eventually it just became too prohibitively expensive to keep creating his own paper version. So he's gone back to the webcomic, and I miss it because I don't read enough webcomics.
Same.
Even though I could.
Yeah.
Andy reads,
Andy's a machine.
He wakes up and it's like the first thing he does is he checks all of his webcomics. And then there's also some ongoing fake D&D thing called Darths and Droids that he reads. And it's this I don't know, this guy or this team of people that are going through every frame of every Star Wars product and pretending it's a D&D campaign, pretending it's a tabletop gaming campaign. Huh. And the characters that play the different characters, like a guy who wanted to min-max his character plays R2-D2. And so the dungeon master is like, the game master is like, well, then you can't talk.
I love
you can
this.
do anything. You've got the MacGuffin, you can MacGyver anything, you can do whatever you want, but you cannot speak. And he's like, all right. And
whoa,
so Darths and Droids, and if you go back, they've gone through, the first, 4, 5, and 6, and then they go back to the prequel, and they, and I believe they did Rogue One, and now they're doing the TV show, The Mandalorian.
It skips some things, interesting.
Yeah, so they have some time because it's something that they love, and it's such an interesting idea that you could do whatever you want, right?
We work in a business that is so built around feel no joy, make only product that will appease people who you hate. And
I don't know about that, but it's
well, but
wow,
I guess it's just like, well, I guess I'll back this up and be a little less of a drama queen here. That I find that people are often confused that I do things because I enjoy them and take pride in my work.
That is so interesting because you grew up here in the Los Angeles area.
Yeah.
Where one should say that there were rose petals at your birth going, be yourself. And you're like, nope, I was born in the Simi Valley. They were just like, why don't you get a job? If you work for the post office, you get a pension. And so there was a bug in this. We are coming, we're coming in hot here. So, by the way, I am talking with Kyle Clark. Kyle Clark is the producer. Jesus Christ. I don't know.
God, Jackie is being attacked by the room itself.
One tiny bug.
There is a...
Tune in, guys. Right around minute 50.
Give this a listen. Yeah, this gets really exciting.
That's going to be a great clip. Okay, so Kyle Clark, This Is Rad is the name of his podcast.
His.
Yes, and 2 albums. What are they called?
They are called Absolute Terror and I'm a Person.
Which is very true. And they are both available probably everywhere, but for sure, if you want to buy them at iTunes and Amazon.
Yes, please.
And possibly Pandora and Spotify, but who knows in this day and age. It's a world gone mad.
It is fun. I do check periodically going because I hate that part of me is like, well, if I get deleted off Spotify, it means I'm a level of successful I can at least take pride in. I'm famous enough for them to remove me from their ecosystem.
Is gone from Spotify.
It's mean you've made it in this business,
Jackie. Finally, the success I've never been looking for. It's literally an extra $300 that is not coming to me. So very sad. But available on iTunes, still streaming on iTunes and Amazon because they are all for sale. So they are also available for streaming if you have those apps. APPs, you guys, the APPs.
It's and also if people are curious, it's still up there. I am going to have to adjust it soon because it is an older version. But if you go to Gumroad, there is the first issue of Tales from an Analog Future. If you go soon, it's actually an uncorrected version right now because we went to print with the first version with a bunch of errors in it. Wow. So if you can go and buy that version of it. Gumroad.com. It's a really great space for people being able to Gumroad.
There you go. .com.
And it's a place where you can sell a lot of it's like Etsy, but for digital product.
Oh, interesting. NFTs.
It's really, I mean, I don't know how much they do with the NFTs, but maybe I'm just turning a hopeful blind eye. It's been cool going through all this stuff and finding more indie resources and DIY resources out there. Like as you know, somebody who tries to stay pretty crafty and scrappy and doing this stuff, it has been really neat to see like not just that there's like resources, but there's like resources and communities full of information about resources to do this stuff. Because it is like, you know, self-publishing is a thankless endeavor. But
Right.
like you
I mean,
open that box.
It's easier today than it's ever been, and yet it's still
People are doing it
feels
less.
kind of pointless. Yeah.
Yeah.
Where you're worried about it, and you're like, and then you hear about 50 Shades of Grey, and you're like, but that's not what I wanted. And so that's not why we created the internet.
The English teacher inside of me is ultimately often just happy anyone reads anything.
That is true. There's
Like,
that. And there's some fan fiction that is amazing. And the purpose of
truly.
fan fiction is mostly fandom and secondary is to teach people how to write.
Yeah. I kicked my teeth. I cut my teeth. Starting with that stuff back in when I was a kid.
I have so many friends who have done decades of fan fiction, and they're just millions of words. And
I've had fan fiction things turn into real projects. Like that's always the most exciting.
Right. That's the amazing part of it. If you do the work, something will be created, and that is cool. Here's a question that I shouldn't ask with 4 minutes left, but here it is. Do you do any? Have you tried any sort of live like portraits or anything like from life?
Yes, I'm actually starting to do more life drawing. I've yet to do there's a website called Line of Action.
Okay.
That is a really great life drawing thing, but you can simulate life lives. I actually just sent it to Lori for her kid, and he was digging it as well. But so I started doing those to do like gesture and get basic figure stuff. But then I have yet to ask a person if they'll sit and let me draw them. Would like to get there, but so I'm trying to go out more to places, and like I've drawn a lot of fountains, sat in front of a lot of coffee beans and drawn whatever the bank was in front of me from that angle. So and learning more shapes and stuff. I've developed a husband of a dear friend of mine is an incredible artist. So he's taken me a little bit under and like critiquing stuff and giving tips on stuff, and like he's been a pretty incredible thing. We'd gone on a trip together, and both of us realized we both just like sit and doodle before going to bed. So we ended up getting to bro down on that, which was fun.
That is outstanding. Ladies and gentlemen, Rangers of the Dork Forest, we have had with us Mr. Kyle Clark again.
Thanks for listening, everybody.
Sure, it's at
Kyle Clark is rad.
At Kyle Clark is rad.
And
Kyle is rad, and it isn't. It's at Kyle Clark is rad.
It's and I'd love if anybody's got thoughts on any of this stuff, either suggestions for books to check out or questions they've got if they want to get into it. The teacher inside of me cannot help but want to help.
Right, and you can find him at Kyle Clark is rad and listen to his podcast and all this stuff. You can also email me, and I will forward it to him, and then
we talk on occasion.
We do. It's Jackie at JackieKashian.com. You know the rules. Everybody, take care of each other.
My hat. They're dancing around my hat. My hat. Well, what do you think of that? If it looks like a Mexican hat dance and it sounds like a Mexican hat dance, it's most likely a Mexican hat dance. So take off your hat and let's dance.
Yay! Oh my God. Why don't we just call that as the end of the show?